Welcome to Realtors Roulette. Join Nicole, Alicia, and John as they uncover untold stories, insider tips, and hidden truths about real estate. Get ready to enjoy this episode coming to you from the beautiful Qu'Appelle Valley in Saskatchewan.
We're here today to talk about what happens after a sale closes. It's a brief overview podcast. We'd like to talk about tying up the loose ends for sellers and for buyers to set everyone up for success.
We're fortunate today to have Marc Kelly with us from Kuka Thuringer in Regina. Marc, thanks for coming out and hanging with us for this afternoon.
It is my absolute pleasure.
As always.
As always. This is interesting because I think as I look through kind of what we've decided to talk about today, there's a bunch of things that, whether this is before the closing or after the closing, it all kind of blurs together because ultimately a lot of this stuff is just the things that you need to do at some point as you get your deals closed up. So I think it's a good list that we've got ahead of us to talk about.
So for sellers, step one, we've got cancel or transfer your homeowner's insurance. So at what point do you call your insurance provider and what would you like to see?
Yeah, honestly, so I have that conversation. There's a list of things that I go through as we're going through the selling documentation, a checklist kind of at the end that deals with a number of these things. And homeowners insurance, you under the contract have the obligation to keep it insured until at least the day of possession. There's reasons that you could have some delays beyond that. So I find that a lot of insurance companies in particular say, hey, it's not the worst thing to have an extra couple of days of insurance after the deal closes. But you can do that almost as soon as the deal is firmed up and really when your possession date is. You can call them and say, hey, effective this day, we're going to be out of there. Make sure we cancel the insurance and see what they have to say if there's anything that they need specifically to make that happen.
John, what do you typically tell people?
I tell people once they get titles transferred. Like myself, I've been through a deal or two where we've had a late closing. They've canceled their insurance and the insurance provider is having a tough time putting insurance on the property after the homeowner has canceled it. So I always tell the sell people, keep it on for a day, 2, 3 extra until, title has changed hands. And it's easier to do that and then try to get it reappointed if the deal, for whatever reason, doesn't close within that day or two. So
yeah, I always like to tell people till you get your money,
right,
your insurance in place.
Right. It's but like Marc said, it should be the day of kind of thing. But
contractually, it's that. But I think like there's a lot of practical reasons why, just to avoid the headache of and for the cost of like 3 days insurance or 4 days insurance, it just makes a lot of sense to have a little extra gravy on it to be comfortable with it.
As far as utilities and services go, that's another big one that we recommend that you call as soon as you get a firm date. Call into your insurance utility companies to get those readings done, settle up your outstanding bills.
In Saskatchewan, obviously, we've got Express Address that, is a good resource for that if you're tech savvy enough to be comfortable doing that without the phone calls.
Yeah.
But that's a good one. The one that the piece that I always get people forgetting about that on both sides of the deal, both purchasing and selling, is calling condo corporations for their property management services for starting condo fees. I'd say if I have anything that tends to be missed, it tends to be that part of it. Sure. So that's a good one to just make sure you're on top of.
And as far as your water bill, sewer bill, if you have a possession mid-month, what is typically done at the law office?
For any of these kind of prepaid expenses or postpaid expenses, we try to do it as part of the statement of adjustments. Sometimes you have to let us know that. Some of the municipalities will when we ask for a tax certificate, but if you think you've got an expense, like we've had it, someone's got a propane tank on the property or, water hauling or whatever, septic system that they need to empty. If you have some of these expenses that are incurred on especially on a prepaid expense, and you want to get a little bit of that back, often let us know and we'll try to incorporate it as part of that adjustments. And that's usually the easiest way to deal with it.
So same kind of idea as what you do with property taxes.
Exactly.
For a mid-year transfer. All right. And of course, one thing that people usually remember to do is forward their mail. There is express address to move your post office box and even your library card all in one place. So that's a good resource to use. it says number 4 here, account closures and membership transfers. So you might be paying for a gym membership or some kind of local membership. I had people with their HelloFresh subscription
Right.
arrived on the buyer's doorstep. They didn't know what it was, so all the meats.
And this is more on the seller side. If you are taking off, you're relocating, make sure to cancel some of those things. It's senseless, to let them run, like gym memberships or memberships to whatever local clubs you have. Just make a list for yourself and go through that as well.
Well, and it's sometimes just that good practical point to reevaluate some of those subscription services that you have over time. Like you may have, you may have forgotten that you have extra insurance, or you may have forgotten that you have other streaming services or whatever. And if you're doing that kind of nasty task of changing addresses and all those other things, maybe from just a common sense budgeting perspective, maybe just start checking off a few of those things to look if there's that you need everything that's there.
And also make sure you provide the buyer of your home with any relevant information about transferable agreements. So let them know, give them a list of who provides your lawn care, who they should be in contact with for water heater maintenance. Or
likewise, same thing with the furnace. I had a furnace installed last year. This is who put it in for me. Always leave that note. We suggest leave that little love letter for the new buyers coming in, that you can itemize and list out who did the work on your house, who's familiar with the property.
Mm-hmm. Possession day, cleaning the home.
This is one, Marc, that we want to lean on you about.
Yeah, it's funny because I've started to see even just some realtors, as matter of course, will include some language associated with what they expect as part of cleaning a house. I don't know if it's necessary or not, but it's at least it gives some standard to what people are expecting. I always understood it to be, to like almost like you would leave a rental property is kind of the expectation. Like it's clean, it's devoid of garbage, and unless you put something in the contract, there's no expectation that you've gone extra miles above in terms of the cleaning with it. Is it nice if you do that? Absolutely. Is it appreciated? 100%. But what I've also discovered through this process of being a real estate lawyer is that there's so many people have such a different view of what clean is. Mm-hmm. And so, if you go into a property and you're that person that needs like the whole property misted with bleach before you walk into the premise, if that's your expectation, set it in the agreement before you get to the point where you're actually closing the deal.
We like to say to people too that how you view the property is likely kind of their standard of clean. So have those expectations in mind. As far as repairs go, if something is broken or you have a door handle that broke, or you accidentally put the couch through the drywall when you're lifting it down the stairs, what are some of those?
Yeah, that's a tough one too, because like the contract itself contemplates if there's been material damage to the contract or to the premises. And so, if you've got a huge flood in the basement, then it's a topic of conversation that your lawyer gets involved in. Similarly, if you've got some of those small bumps and pieces and cracks that have happened as part of the move process, there can be a conversation. But if someone is not willing to be reasonable about it, it's hard. It's a hard thing to try to litigate or fight over after the fact. Sometimes that's just the unfortunate consequences of moving, especially if it's small things that have happened over the course of that transition. So I think it depends on how much time and energy and expense you want to spend trying to fight over a hole in the wall or something like that.
Right. I know for on our side of it, like the buy side of it, it's an emotional experience. They're going to something, they've signed paperwork, they know they have a payment, and I think it's a lot of times it's overwhelming if there is a couple of those small nicks in the paint, or the floor wasn't swept properly or whatever. I think it's easy to be overwhelmed with that. So it's like and you are right, like there is no checklist there. I always tell people, please leave the property the way you would wish to find it.
Yeah, and like that's a great standard, I think, because I think it kind of to put someone else in the perspective of what the buyer is going through, that's helpful. Some people just don't care. Right. That's the problem. Is that
we've had that,
right?
Just yeah, as far as keys, garage door openers are forgotten more often than not. I always try to typically remind people, hey, make sure you grab those remotes out of your car before you take off.
Yeah, I assume you guys are like skilled at programming new ones then, is what you're telling me.
Well, some of us are more skilled than others.
I bought a couple of garage door openers in my day.
I don't know how to do that. Um, and then the final one here is a tax implication piece. Consult with your tax professional about potential capital gains or deductions, and save all your documents for tax purposes.
Yeah, like taxes can be a funny thing with property. For the most part, like there's a couple of different taxes that you can consider with it. GST is one of them. Most residential properties are considered GST exempt if they've been used. Residential properties, new property, it's a different consideration. Sometimes that comes up. Capital gains, again, most residential properties are owner occupied and therefore are subject to the capital gains exemption. Again, you really need to talk to because there may be a reason that that's not the case in yours, depending on ownership or if you own multiple properties or whatever. So talk to your tax people about that. There's stuff that you have to deal with before the deal closes if you're a seller. So if you're a non-resident, as an example, you can have some issues around having to make a withholding from the sale proceeds that you'd want a clearance certificate from the CRA to deal with. So that's a whole other kind of process and challenge with sales.
Touch base with your tax professional or your lawyer for some advice, and keep your documents.
Awesome. Like, I think we pretty much covered off everything that we can.
For the seller's steps, we have some tips for a buyer that they can take after closing to ensure that they are set up for success as well. So a buyer, before they get their keys, they need to have an active homeowner's insurance policy. And that's something that you'll make sure that they have in place before they.
Yeah,
Do you instruct the buyers, Mark, like when they come into your office to do mortgage, sign mortgage documents and so forth?
We have to get it. We have to report back to the lender that we have insurance on the property. So if there is any sort of lender, we have to get insurance on it. The only time that I am less concerned about it is if it's a cash deal, and even then, it's still a recommendation for people to get insurance, but I don't have to see copies of a binder note or something like that in order to take possession at that particular point in time.
Right.
And then a buyer, they also can use that same express address to set up the utilities and services, and make sure that they have hooked up the water and sewer in their names. Make sure that they do those meter reads. Oftentimes it's a good idea to even snap a picture of the SaskPower,
Right.
Sask Energy meters on your day of possession. You can call in and give those meter reads if you want. Make sure you schedule your internet to be installed. In these small rural communities, sometimes they're a few weeks out. So it's nice that you don't call on the day of your possession. You call in advance so that you can get internet shortly after your possession.
Yeah. And on that note, like as much as we like to make sure everything is on time for possessions, there's a lot of reasons that things get delayed for one reason or not. So, unfortunately, don't book it for like 2 hours after you take the keys in, because there's a possibility that there's some sort of issue that's going to be delayed to later in that day, and then at that point you are stuck with 3 weeks later because you couldn't get in when you hoped you would.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Make sure that when you arrive with your real estate agent, you conduct a walkthrough, ensure that you are receiving the home in good condition.
And that's a big one. I think that that we have had in the past absentee buyers that never showed up on the day of possession, but it's crucial that they do, because essentially it's their house from that day forward. Get a friend, a family member. If you can't make it the day of, get them to meet the realtor there to do that walkthrough for you. So just so they know exactly what you're getting.
The thing to note about that is that I've often in the past had people that have called us up after they've taken possession of the property, and they're like, hey, here's a problem. And so, can you just do a holdback on that? And the reality is if we've gotten to that point where you've got keys and you're in there, if we've committed to that, then we are committed to giving all of the money as part of that transaction as well. So we can call the other law firm and say, hey, here's a problem. Would you mind if we held back X number of dollars until it's fixed? But if they say no, we don't believe that that's a problem, then I've got to give them all the cash, and then you've got to deal with it kind of as a future problem and not an issue that we can deal with as part of the closing.
So sometimes there's a little bit of back and forth between law firms, but the ultimate remedy is often litigation.
I can't say that I haven't seen a lot of it, because often we're dealing with the small amounts of little fixes, right? So, but if it's a big issue, then yeah, for sure, litigation could be part of it. I find for the most part, between all of the professionals on it, usually there's some form of either remedy to it, or people just accept it as it is and kind of move forward with it. So if there's something really big that you want to make sure has been done before the deal is closed, then make sure that that's how the deal is structured.
And it's not for nitpicky things,
No.
but ultimately, if they took the appliances that they were supposed to leave with the house, and you get there on possession date, that might be something that the two law firms can.
For sure. Like if all of a sudden, fridge, stove, washer, dryer are missing from the property and it's very clearly defined, I would expect that the lawyer on the selling side would have a very real conversation with their client about what they did and how we're going to remedy this.
Right. And most of those times, I think those are honest mistakes. I know I've had relocates.
Movers
phone Jay's, and Jay's loads the whole thing, the top to bottom, whole house, fridge, stove, washer, dryer. And 2 days later, possession happens. We walk in and there's nothing there.
Yeah.
And that usually goes over fairly smooth. Like, I don't think that it wasn't intentional. I think it was more of a mistake, but yeah.
Updating your address, and some places that you might not think about updating your address with would be your financial institutions, your employers, health card, schools, any of your subscriptions. Make sure that you're calling in to update your address to your new address for all of those. And introducing yourself to the community. Any ideas of what you could do to, having just gone through a move?
It was great. We just moved to Swift Current, and one of the really cool things that happened was we were invited to a block party within a couple of weeks of moving in. And not that I expect your neighbors to throw you a party when you move in, but it was a really cool opportunity to meet a lot of people. And, maybe it's not something that big, but, I've also had people that pop by with some baking, or, especially those really close neighbors to say hello was a cool piece to feel welcome in the community.
That's awesome. Yeah. Make sure you get out there and join some local groups and get social and familiarize yourself.
Join a theater production, coach some basketball.
Do all the things. Coach a ball team, coach a basketball team.
Yeah.
And then make sure that you understand your ongoing costs. Like, isn't this a huge one for a buyer?
Yeah.
What are a couple of things, John?
Well, especially for condos, I know are, those to accept those fees that are continually evolving for the maintenance cost of it.
For me, the one cost that tends to be totally confused not every single time, but many times, is property taxes. And the problem with property taxes is that the math associated with what we're doing at the law office just at times seems, it just is confusing for the average purchaser who doesn't understand the timing of when taxes are both paid and what they're applicable for. So it's not uncommon for us to get phone calls 3 or 4 months after the transaction's closed, where I know that we've talked about this 3 different ways, to say, well, but why am I paying for the full year's property taxes? And I said, well, because you got a discount of like $2,000 on the deal when we closed. So you were taking over the responsibility for that vendor. And it's like, oh, well, I didn't plan for that. Well, I'm sorry, but we had a conversation. We had this checklist. We talked about this. It was on the numbers that we gave to you. Like, there's a lot of different ways that we try to explain it, but it doesn't get internalized very easily.
Yeah.
And I get that there's a lot of information going, but it's definitely the one area that I have probably the most confusion around. Yeah.
You know why that is? Because municipalities charge your taxes from January 1st to December 31st, but the notice comes out like July.
Yep.
Right? So I think that people think that they're prepaying for 2025 in July. All of July is prepaid and we're done. And so I think there's some... They don't. There's
a lot of confusion, and there are a lot of reasons for it. Like, that's one of them for sure. The other is that if you have a lender involved in paying for your property taxes for you, they collect June to June to pay it at the end of June. So you could be paying for 2025's taxes in 2024, and at the same time, let's say you bought in 2024, you're also paying for 2020. So it feels like,
Right.
especially in the first couple of years, it feels like double taxation, or it feels like something has gone wrong. But it all kind of washes out in the math, but people don't see that, especially when money's tight when you're first buying a place. I get why it's frustrating.
Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on. And then planning for your long-term projects and maintenance tasks. Just review your inspection report and see what that honey-do list looks like.
Right. I think actually you and I and Nikki did a podcast on that not that long ago, saying, hey, what are your foregoing costs for maintenance of a property? And yeah, they were larger than what you'd think, but yeah, make sure keep an eye on that, and definitely watch your home inspector's honey-do list. And yeah.
Again, thanks for tuning into our podcast. Just to recap, we're making sure that we touch base with our professionals, both our legal team and our real estate agents, and we can offer some tips on how to make your transaction go smoothly, and even offer a checklist of all these things that you need to be doing.
Marc, I really appreciate you taking the time today and come out and hang in with us for the bit.
All good. My pleasure. This is always fun.
Guys, have yourselves a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to Authentic Realty's podcast. Follow, review, and share this episode to spread the knowledge. To connect with your favorite local realtors, call 306-695-HOME.